All right, so I've been involved with this project for a number of years now as in the capacity of a technical advisor. So obviously I think the project is quite special. What I think is special about the project, apart from all the things that you've heard already, is perhaps a little bit different from the others. My perspective is that one of the things that makes this project so special among all the different literacy, digital literacy initiatives that there are in the world is our commitment to open source and to open licensing. So that's, I'll explain why that is as well, because I think no, open source is maybe a word that people have heard, or a term that you might have heard before, but maybe are not clear on what it is or why it's important. I hope that you leave today knowing exactly why it's important and some of the reasons why it's so powerful to base a project on open source, and more broadly to work openly in terms of being knowledge workers and creating knowledge in the academia. I feel like one of the things that we could do better is to think more about how other people might reuse our work later on, not just cite it, but also reuse it to create further knowledge, to construct further knowledge, and to facilitate use of the knowledge that we create in ways that we might not have anticipated. So repurposing for things that we might not have thought of before. So you might know that open source, the open in open source is something that represents the sort of free and unfettered exchange or sharing of knowledge without boundaries, or with as few boundaries as possible. And our project, as I said, is committed to open source and to open licensing in the spirit of the original stories. The stories were shared open licensed. They were sort of born open licensed. And we have tried to respect that through our commitment to maintaining that open license and to creating further open licensed resources. So OER, open educational resources, is one of the benefits or byproducts of the work that we do. So let me, because it's hard to get a sense of what open source means, I'll try to explain in practical terms what this looks like in real life. What open source means, basically, is that a teacher in Uganda can write a story in Lusoga, Ugandan language, to share with his son. That story can be translated into multiple African languages, and then sent to South Africa for illustration. So it's illustrated by a graphic artist in South Africa. Then that story goes to Canada, where it's recorded in 37 different languages of the world. It's translated, it's recorded at UBC Studios, and then moves on, right? In the process of creating all these sound files, text files that did not exist before. Those stories are translated into, let's say, Arabic, recorded in Arabic, and then shared with educators in Germany who work with refugees to use the audio and the text in educational purposes there, because we also have German translations. That's one side of it, right? So those are the translations. It all happens without any friction or any obstacles or impediments that would traditionally make such a process slow and difficult. So then what happens is you get requests from people. In Norway, we have a version of the site that is in Norwegian. Of course, one of our collaborators is heavily involved in that. Dr. Stranger Johansen in Norway has been working with the stories there. And he has someone in Norway that would very much like to translate the stories into Kurdish. So that's great. We want to encourage that. We want to translate the stories into Kurdish. We have created, as part of the process of translating, we've created tools for translation, including automated translation tools that make the process of translating incredibly simple and easy and automate a lot of that process as well. The problem is that the Kurdish translator would prefer to translate from Norwegian into Kurdish. So they're more comfortable with Norwegian, right? So if we were working with a lot of proprietary software, that would be a difficult thing to think about, right? What do we do with that? It's perhaps hard-coded in English. We just, we never thought about this. It's a purpose we had not set out to have for this material. But in fact, all of our data is open. It's shared in ways that are as reusable as possible. The The program itself is available on GitHub. You can download it. You can change it however you want if you want to translate other things. And so we can do very simply, just with a few minutes work, we can in fact create a Norwegian translator. So this is what the translator looks like in English. It's very simple and straightforward. You can, in a few seconds, usually get a translation if you're a translator into that language. It's very quick to use. And boom, we just have a Norwegian translator now. So the Norwegian translator app allows the Kurdish translator to use the app. And is this effective? Well, I found out very quickly, because that same night we received 27 translations into Kurdish. And now the German site, our German Storybooks site, also has Kurdish, because that was a language that they'd requested. And all of as you can see, the data just sort of flows freely between the sites where it's needed. So whatever translations come up in one context get used somewhere else, and they're freely available to anybody who needs them. So this is the power of open source. We then have a project in Mexico where there are indigenous languages. A dozen or so indigenous languages are being translated for the Storybooks Mexico project. And of course, they wanted the translator in Spanish because their translators are native speakers of indigenous Mexican languages, and they feel more comfortable translating from Spanish into those languages. Of course, we can accommodate that. So instantaneously, essentially, we have a Spanish version of the translator, which has created the ability to translate all of those languages. So when I say that all of the tools that we make are open and are also shared freely, I mean everything. And I'd like us to all think about, when we leave, just how much of our process when we work is something that could be reused by someone else. Do we really want people recreating the wheel all the time? For all of the small things that we do, right? When we create a presentation, for instance, is it necessary that everyone who comes after that has to make the same presentation, or just the formatting of the presentation? Would it be easier if just that formatting was shared and we could add more data in later? It's the same principle, right? When we create an application or a website framework or anything like that, it's just a lot easier if that's shared with anybody who needs to use it. So these are all open licensed materials that are shared on GitHub. You can download, this is our website framework. Nairobi CSS is a product of the work that we did, and it's freely available to anybody who wants to build a literacy website. So you can use that to create your own Storybooks website and put your own stories in there. You don't have to use our stories. So that's just, it's a byproduct that's useful to a large number of other people, as you can see from the number of offshoot sites. So that's just one of the examples. There are also, I should say before I jump forward, there are also, people often ask, one of the major things apart from PDFs is, well, I want to download the audio or something like this, or I don't want to do it one by one, or I want all the PDFs. Can you do that for me? And of course, you could respond to those requests one by one, but it's much easier just to put them out there. And so, of course, if you go to to our source page or download page, we have a whole page where you can download all the audio, and we split it up by language. So I just want all the audio in Persian, I want all the audio in French. I can just download it all there. It's all high-quality audio that has been carefully post-processed by our sound engineer. So it's extremely valuable resource on its own. If you want all the PDFs, you can download them as well. If you want the software, you want to run the site on your own server, you can download the whole website and just and host it wherever you would like. We would like people to access the material, and we're not concerned so much about putting obstacles in their way, in the way of that. So a couple of the, I don't have a lot of time, so I'll just make this quick, but a couple of the interesting offshoots. What can you do when you have a whole lot of data? You've got essentially hundreds of hours of audio in 37 different languages. You've got just huge number of text files that are all coded and in a database that's easy to access, and so you can there's basically a parallel corpus where you can pair any two languages together and any two translations together to do what you would like. Well, you can do a number of things that you might not expect. One of them is making audio close tests. These are just automatically generated. You can access these on the website. They're basically it's something that Duolingo has the same kind of a thing on their site called Stories, and it's very popular. But we generated these in literally less than 5 minutes by pressing a button, right? That says, I want these languages and these audio files and these text files to be paired together. And so if you grab a story, So this is that story that was written by the Ugandan teacher, by the way, the very tall man. It was a real story. Wasn't just it wasn't just rhetorical. So you have this, this test. You get all these sound files. You can listen to the sound files.
His hoe was too short.
Right? And you can decide whether or not you know the word. So if you get the word wrong, it calculates your score. And if you get the word right, it eventually will give you a check mark. So it's an easy, simple thing. This is not a complex application. It's just a freebie. It's a kind of a bonus you get from having all this data lying around. And sometimes we're just thinking about, what can we do with this data? Very quickly. I just want to pair languages and do things with them. And you see people excited about some kind of learning resource to do with language. You can almost always recreate it yourself. We just have all this data sitting around for you to use in any creative way you would like. So there's a lot of experts in pedagogy here. I'm sure you can think of more interesting things to do. One other thing that's a little bit newer is word lists, because again, we've created corpora for less resource languages, which includes stop lists, so linguistic stop lists for languages like Swahili and Somali that did not exist before. So we were able to do a lot of really interesting creative things with them. And one of those things is to pull out all the commonly used words and create salient word lists for each story. So every story in every language, there's a language drop down here. So all these different languages, you can grab a word list that looks like this. You can print it off. You can fill out the words. You can check off the ones you know. It's just a very simple, easy kind of an activity that you can do. We have loads of stuff like this, but I have a limited amount of time, so I'm going to leave it at that. But that's the kind of thing that you can do when you work openly, is basically you'll find that your imagination is the limit. That's it.